Okay, picture this. The real quiet of a vast northern forest, home to reindeer traditional life, and then suddenly the roar of fighter jets, the rumble of
A
tanks.
powerful image, yeah. A real collision.
Exactly, a collision, and that's really what we're diving into today.
We're looking at how Finland, joining NATO, this big geopolitical shift, is, well, impacting reindeer herding right there on the ground.
And this deep dive is really for you. Maybe you're tracking global affairs for, say, the UPSC mains, needing these specific
Or
examples.
maybe prepping for prelims, wanting to see the real-world effects of these big decisions.
Or maybe you're just curious about how these huge international events actually play out locally. We're getting our information straight from reporting in the Eurasian Times on this.
Right. And our mission here is to unpack what that source tells us about this tricky intersection of national security and, well, traditional ways of making a living.
So let's set the context first. Finland made a huge change, didn't they?
Absolutely. Decades of military non-alignment just gone. They joined NATO in 2023.
Driven by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, obviously. The whole security picture changed.
Exactly. And then came a defense cooperation agreement with the U.S. That kicked in this year, 2024. And the direct result, according to the reporting.
More military activity, more training, more exercises. Finnish forces, international troops, too.
And it's happening in specific places. One key area the Eurasian Times piece highlights is Rovajärvi.
Rovajärvi, what's significant about that place?
Well, it's apparently the largest artillery range in Western Europe. Huge. About 1,070 square kilometers.
Wow, that's big.
Yeah, and it's pretty close to the Russian border, maybe 100 kilometers away. So, strategically important for training. Size, terrain, seasons, all that.
But here's the rub, right?
Here's the rub. It's also smack bang in the middle of a reindeer husbandry district.
Okay, so you've got military training and traditional herding basically competing for the same space. What are the herders actually saying?
The report quotes a local herder, Kyösti Utila. He's head of the reindeer district there.
And what's his take?
He says military activity has ramped up massively since Finland joined NATO.
Massively. That's pretty clear language. What kind of specific impacts does he talk about?
He mentions physical damage, land being clear-cut, trenched for exercises. He calls these lost grazing areas.
Lost grazing.
Yeah, and he points to heavy tanks, thousands of soldiers moving through. They destroy the lichen pastures.
Ah, the lichen. That's the reindeer's main food, isn't it? Especially critical in winter.
Exactly. It's vital. And he's worried this destruction could be long-term.
How so?
He's quoted saying something like, reindeer will not be able to live here anymore. It's a pretty stark warning about the future of herding in those specific spots.
Wow, that really hits home. Is he the only one feeling this way?
No, the report brings in another herder from Rovajärvi, Rika Porapudis.
And her experience?
Similar. She says the military presence increased radically after NATO accession, and this forces them into using fenced feeding areas more often.
So it changes how they work? Less natural grazing, more managing them in enclosures?
Seems like it. It disrupts the traditional free grazing way of doing things, and she also brings up the stress on the animals themselves.
From the noise and activity, I imagine.
Precisely. She mentions big live fire exercises. The source gives an example of one with like 6,500 soldiers from Finland, Sweden, Britain, happening around mid-May.
Mid-May. Hang on, isn't that peak calving season for reindeer?
Exactly. That's her major concern. These huge, loud exercises are happening right when the female reindeer are giving birth or have newborn calves.
Oh, that sounds incredibly disruptive.
She says it stresses the mothers and drives them and their calves away from their usual natural pastures. You can imagine the impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's maybe zoom out for a second. How big a deal is reindeer husbandry in Finland overall?
The source gives some numbers. Over 4,300 reindeer owners, something like 184,000 reindeer.
That's quite a few.
And it covers a huge area, 57 husbandry districts, making up about 36% of Finland's land area.
Wow, over a third of the country.
Yeah. And it's culturally massive, especially for the indigenous Sami people in Sápmi. That's the traditional Sami homeland, stretching across Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Russia.
Right. But it's not only Sami herders, is it?
No. The herders near Rovajärvi, for instance, are mentioned as being non-Sami. But for many, both Sami and non-Sami who do it full-time, it's their main income, selling meat, pelts, handicrafts.
So it's a livelihood, a culture, facing new pressures. Are these military pressures the only challenge, or is there more going on?
That's a really important point the Eurasian Times article touches on. It brings in Tuomas Aslak Juuso, who's the acting president of the Sami parliament in Finland.
Okay, and what's his perspective?
He points out the Sami herders, about 1,200 of them in Finland, are already juggling major challenges. Climate change is a big one. Other land use changes, too.
And he adds this increased militarization of the Arctic to that list.
Yes, he sees it as another significant pressure point.
How is climate change affecting them already?
He explains that changing winters, less reliable snow, freezing patterns shifting mean they already have to resort to supplementary feeding more often.
To avoid, what, mass die-offs?
Exactly, in order to avoid mass deaths, as the source quotes him. So the traditional free grazing on natural pastures is already under strain.
So climate change makes grazing harder, and now increased military activity is damaging the pastures that remain. That sounds like a double whammy.
Pretty much. And Juuso apparently mentioned a specific negative experience from a big international military exercise back in 2023 in Finnish Sapmi.
What happened there?
Well, according to him, the herders weren't properly informed beforehand, and things like tractors used in the exercise damaged the lichen cover.
Damage he thinks might be permanent.
Potentially irreversible, yeah. That's the concern raised.
That lack of communication sounds like a key issue, too. What are groups like the Sami Parliament asking for?
They're calling for proper early consultation before these activities happen in Sami areas, and they want clear responsibility taken for any damage or harm caused.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've heard from the herders about the increase, the damage, the stress. We've heard the Sami perspective on broader challenges and consultation. What about the Finnish Defence Forces? What's their side of the story, according to the report?
The Eurasian Times includes their statement. They do acknowledge that, yes, training and exercises have increased.
Because of the security situation?
Because of the worsened security situation, that's their reasoning. But they also state that reindeer husbandry needs are taken into account in the planning of exercises.
How?
They mention considering things like the timing and locations of exercises, and they also say they're in daily contact with the herders, specifically in Rovajärvi.
Okay, so they say they are considering the herders and talking to them daily, but the herders we heard from describe massive increases and radical changes. Damaged land, disrupted calving.
Right. There seems to be a disconnect, doesn't there?
Yeah, a potential gap between the planning process the military describes and the actual lived reality the herders are reporting.
Exactly. The accounts suggest that even if needs are being considered, the sheer scale and impact of this ramped-up activity are still causing significant problems for the herders, potentially long-lasting ones.
So pulling this all together, why is this specific story from northern Finland important for you, our listener, to get your head around?
Well, because it's such a clear, ground-level example of a much bigger phenomenon. These huge geopolitical decisions. A country changing its entire defense strategy, joining an alliance like NATO, they don't just happen on paper.
They have real, tangible consequences.
Profound ones, right down to the local level. This case really shows how national security priorities can collide with traditional livelihoods, community well-being, even environmental health.
Especially in sensitive areas like the Arctic. And for anyone tracking current affairs, maybe particularly for UPSC aspirants who need to analyze these complex interactions from multiple viewpoints.
Understanding these ripple effects is vital. It's not just about the grand strategy, it's about what happens to the land, to the people, to ancient traditions when those strategies are put into action.
Right. This situation gives you real insight into those tensions between global events and local lives.
It forces you to look past the headlines, doesn't it?
Definitely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, the core tension seems clear based on the Eurasian Times report. Finland needed to bolster its security joining NATO. That led to more military exercises.
Which, in turn, is creating real problems for reindeer herding, damaging grazing land, stressing animals at critical times, forcing changes to traditional practices.
Raising big questions about how you balance national security needs with local livelihoods, environmental protection, traditional culture, especially when things are changing so fast.
Yeah, and maybe that leaves us with a thought for you to chew on. As geopolitics keep shifting, as security concerns rise globally, how can we, societies, governments, international bodies, get better at navigating these clashes?
How do we balance defending a nation with defending traditional ways of life, fragile environments, and the rights of local communities, particularly indigenous ones?
It's a tough balancing act. No easy answers, but we absolutely have to grapple with it.
And remember, this exploration was based on detailed reporting we found in the Eurasian Times.
So if you found this deep dive useful, maybe you're studying for exams like UPSC, or you just want to stay informed on these complex global issues, please do consider liking this discussion.
Subscribe for more deep dives into current affairs and definitely leave a comment. Let us know your thoughts, or if there are other topics you'd like us to unpack from the sources.
Your engagement really helps us keep digging into these important stories.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.